Hello, everybody. This is Monica Paulini, your webcast host, and this is Pairing Partners with Sense of Healing. And today, I have the big pleasure to talk again to Yago Tenorio, who has a new position, a new job at Verizon as the SVP and CTO, and he was previously working at Vodafone in the UK. So, Yago, welcome so much. It's a pleasure to talk to you again.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is mine. It's really good to see you again, Monica.
Absolutely. So, we obviously want to know what is that you're going to be doing and everything. But before that, I have a question that I get asked all the time. Every time I go to Europe, everybody says, well, what's up with the US? It's so different. And then I got the same question in the US, and, what's going on in Europe? How is it that, the technology is the same, but the market is completely different? So you've seen them both. Well, can you answer that question? And let's put it to rest if we can.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yes, I've seen them both by now, but I've only experienced the US market for a little more of a couple of months. So I'm still understanding and learning. Now the market in Europe I've seen for many, many years. However, that said, Monica, I'm a technologist. And as you said, technology is the same on, both sides. Remarkably the same. So maybe the frequency bands change a little, and maybe a few things, are slightly different from whatever filters or, emissions or, okay, fine. But those details are minor. The technology behind is the same, is 5G, and essentially, is 5G on both sides. However, it is true that the day-to-day life of an operator and being an operator as a business is dramatically different. And I've been kind of trying to understand why that is. I don't think there is something fundamentally different or wrong that the operators did in Europe versus what the operators did in the US. I think the difference, I think you pointed it out, is in the market. Probably there are some things that are down to, socio-demographic, aspects. Maybe there are some things down to social politics. For the majority of it, I think is regulation, both explicitly, within this industry, as well as, in the broader sense as, when you think of Europe and how Europe runs as a region, the differences with the US are remarkable. And being in an operator, I used to be a Vodafone that's, you could say is pan-European or at least operating in many European countries. Now I'm in Verizon in the US, focusing on the domestic market. Well, you can see every day how the US is significantly unified as a single market. And then, of course, you have different, states, and I'm still learning about the different regulation in the different states. Fine, but those differences are completely unremarkable when you compare them to the differences across the different countries in Europe, which is operating as a collection of completely disparate markets with completely different regulation in all aspects. So you can't have a spectrum, that is pan-European for most of the cases. And you have different regulation when it comes to even like, filtering or emission, as I was saying before, which in some cases are actually wider than the differences from, Europe to the US. You can't really have a single core. You can kind of think of, your European presence as a single network that you then architect in a best possible way for your customers in terms of resilience. No, you have to follow, domestic regulation that is remarkably different in every single market. So that's an example. But I think when it comes to the wider industry and how it's been regulated, you kind of understand, or you have a good kind of view that the US market today in telecoms, I think, is a healthy market, is functional, is good for customers, is a good business for operators. Quality of service is remarkably good. It reminds me in many aspects of what the telco market used to be maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago, maybe in Europe. Today, maybe this is a bit of an exaggeration, but it feels that in most cases and in most countries it's a race to the bottom, which hasn't been particularly good for the business, but it hasn't been good for the customer either. So yes, I mean, it's not a secret that the ARPU, or what customers pay each month for the service, is remarkably lower in Europe versus the US. I think, that's no surprise to anybody. But what the customer actually gets in terms of quality is also remarkably different. So is that what the customer really want? Or has, the administration been actually taking that decision on behalf of the customer, and it's not necessarily aligned with what most of the customers want? Because there is always, a possibility of getting, from a value brand, some kind of, lower quality, lower price, same kind of value for money. That exists in the US as well. So you have optionality as a customer. I think more and more in Europe, I don't think you have that option, because the business in general has been cornered into a place of cost cutting and race to the bottom. Um, we, for someone like me that I've been too long in this industry, and I am European, is sad to see. I think, this is something that I think the US got right and Europe didn't. And there are many aspects, and unfortunately, some of them are not just telco industry related. It's more how Europe is run as a region, which is much, much wider than this industry. And I think it's a complete missed opportunity, but that's just my personal political view.
Yeah, well, especially, well, not necessarily, but I completely agree with you that if you look at other sectors, it's similar in a way that in US you tend to pay more for a lot of services, and the services are different now, whether that's what the customers want or not. I mean, that's a different, but it's not a telecom specific or wireless specific. Broadband is much more expensive. Healthcare is much more expensive. All sorts of things are more expensive, but you do get a different service too. So the question but now let me ask you something that it's kind of more sort of related to technology. In Europe, there is much more of a willingness to share infrastructure. In the US, there is some sharing, but not quite as much. Why do you think? Is it because there's more operators are more profitable?
I think that is a really good point. I guess the question is, would European operators, do you think that would we have done sharing to the extent that we did if it wasn't for the pressure on costs? So had revenues not started to, go down significantly, and then, should we not be in a race to the bottom? You think that sharing would have happened to the extent that it did? My view, probably not. But to some extent, I think so. Actually, I think in some markets, like in Spain, I think I was there when it started. We started far before we kind of, we could feel the pressure of cost, and that was driving, what would you do with technology? We started because it made sense. Only in rural, only where, maybe this is an oversimplification, but if I'm deploying a network and, the minimum kind of, capacity unit is such that, it's almost 60% empty, and my competitors are doing the same, it kind of makes sense maybe to combine both, because you can just squeeze both, and the sum of 1 plus 1 is still equals 1. So there is saving to make for everybody. And then if you can do that, then you can afford rolling out more coverage more quickly into more places, which is good for the customer. So why not doing it? Now, interestingly, what rules that decision, what drives that decision is the market dynamic. So if you have like an incumbent that is very dominant, and then you have followers that are similar size, but the gap is significant, it kind of makes sense for them both to try to get together and close the gap on, maybe in this case, rural coverage that the incumbent may have, so that the competition in the market kind of equalizes, and that makes sense. Now, that may not be the case for the US, funnily enough. Therefore, maybe in the absence of the excessive unhealthy pressure on cost, and in the absence of market dynamics that actually advocates for maybe a few operators to get together to try to narrow the gap with the incumbent, maybe that's why we haven't seen it. Now, the interesting point is there anything that we can learn from how, like, the best practices in Europe of reducing cost without hitting the quality for the customer? So imagine if you find a magical kind of formula of reducing cost while you still improve the customer experience. Is there anything that we can learn from the US into what happened in Europe, even if it was driven from by a completely different kind of factor that's not present in the US? I think that's something that we need to think about.
That's your job, isn't it? Okay,
I think
before we get to that one, another thing is if you look at Europe, the distribution of humans and buildings is very different. So in the US, you have much bigger, more dispersed population, and even cities are less compact, and the buildings are built differently. How is that changes the way you develop and operate networks, you think?
I would put the last factor you mentioned, probably the first one. So the way cities are built is structurally different, both in the materials used as well as in the morphology of the city. So what you have in Manhattan, as an example, is not very common in Europe. You only have it, partially in the city, in London, in a couple of places, Canary Wharf and the City of London, and that's it. There is no kind of significant presence of that, type of morphology, which makes it remarkably hard for operators to provide mobile service, because you suddenly have not just a two-dimensional map, you have a significant three-dimensional problem, right? And you may have coverage in the lower 10 stories of the building, but maybe there is zero coverage in the upper 50. So that's a different problem to solve. And that would be one factor. The other one would be where the population is so spread that there is like almost the density is almost zero. So there is nobody, but you still have to provide service, which may be strongly uneconomical, but is appreciated by the customer. That is, I think, a factor statistically that is more predominant in the US. However, in Europe, there are many different realities combined. So when you look at Germany, there is almost no empty spaces. So it's like a spread of population that is similar to the countryside, outside of the cities in some states in the US, I believe. But when you look at Spain, a case I know well, is mostly empty. So it has vast spaces with nearly nobody that you still have to cover to provide a good service, to the customer that occasionally step into the wild, which is similar to the US reality, but of course in a completely different scale. It's just a factor. So I don't think, outside of these two things, the rest is dramatically different, enough to just, be a factor in building a mobile network. I think the reality today that is driving the industry with efficiency, with more efficient solutions, with new solutions like satellite, maybe we'll speak about that later, I think are of huge interest in both Europe and the US for similar reasons. But I think the use cases may actually differ slightly, and the regulation may be more favorable in one versus the other. Because you may imagine Europe as a collection of small, completely different markets with different regulations where you can't really shoot, over the border. Well, how are you going to do that from whatever 700 kilometers away and contain your coverage in a small country in Central Europe is more difficult than just fill the US map, which you can do only once with a consistent service, consistent spectrum. That's where the advantage of being a single market can plays in.
Absolutely. Now, okay, now let's talk about your new job. So, as you said, you're European, you're moving to the US. So what's your new role at Verizon? What should we expect from you?
So, yeah, okay. So I think the most exciting part is to lead like the technology strategy in Verizon and contribute and support the company to get first on whatever is to come in the next few years and beat competition, bring it to our customers ahead of anybody else and better, which is something that really, really, really excites me. Um, Apart from that, there are some like much more concrete things that are an immediate priority. So if you look at the organization that I support today, there is a number of things that we're going to be doing this year, from supporting engineering and deployment with the OSS and bringing new tools, and modernizing our tools, making sure that they have the best available for them to use. Security operations, of course, representing Verizon's interest in the standard forums, which is similar to what I used to do in Vodafone. Support the rest of the teams with, in the network implementation, which is, I'm truly amazed at how Verizon goes about that and how operationally excellent this company is something that I am still learning from every day, and I am truly honored to be able to contribute to that. So there are some pressing priorities for this coming year, but I think if you have to summarize or understand what it is I'm going to be doing, is to make sure that the technology strategy and the roadmap and the technology decisions are the best for our customers.
No, when you were at Vodafone, you had a particularly prominent role in Open RAN. I'm sure that that's not all you did, but that's most of the time when we see you quoted, that would be on Open RAN, and you were at TIP and all that. Is that going to be much of a focus? I mean, I guess you have a broader role now at Verizon. So how is that? How is Open RAN fitting in?
That, believe it or not, that's a question that I get often. Yeah, and people is trying to read something into your Verizon hiring me when my, I think, public profile was, I think, yes, it's true, dominated by what we were doing on Open RAN. I think, okay, so reality is first, what I was doing at Vodafone was much wider than Open RAN anyway, but yes, Open RAN got all the headlines because it was like the trending topic anyway. So everybody wanted to talk about that, and I was there. So that's how I got associated with it. And true, I dedicated a lot of my time to promote this as a technology because I think I'm sure is the next architecture. I think by now that's not news. I think everybody knows is the next architecture, and the question is when and how much and what is it going to start and how is it going to look like exactly. But no one doubts that it's coming and it's coming very strong. So with that in mind, would I move to I don't know, to an operation that has nothing to do with Open RAN? Probably not. But in reality, would I have actually moved or changed roles to any other place than Verizon from Vodafone? Probably not anyway. So I don't think Open RAN was a factor. But we must not forget that Verizon, way before I joined, and not because of me, had the biggest deployment of Open RAN that I know in the industry. So it's frequently quoted that we have 130,000 Open RAN radios deployed, which, by the way, they're probably deployed in nearly 30,000 Open RAN sites. And that Open RAN label, I can assure you, is the exact same thing that I called Open RAN when I was at Vodafone. There's nothing for me to change or to do because we're talking about, in this case, coincidentally or not, we kind of both organizations landed into the notion that probably if you want to do Open RAN today, Samsung is your best partner of choice. So I think both Vodafone in the UK, when I was there, as well as Verizon across the US, started deploying Samsung's Open RAN on top of third-party operating system, say, and on top of third-party off-the-shelf servers, which is the exact same architecture and is what you would call Open RAN. So it's a software from one party that is running on the operating system of a different party that is running on an off-the-shelf server from another party. Now, to what point, and when do we introduce third-party radios or not? That's the same problem that we were working on when I was at Vodafone, and it's also the same problem that Verizon has been working on and making progress. As you may have seen the press release that we issued in November about the University of Texas, where we integrated CommScope into a distributed system, which was really nice, really, really nice, and a first in the industry. So I think, yes, the short answer is, well, yes, of course, you will hear more from Verizon about Open RAN, but to be completely fair and honest, I mean, they were doing a phenomenal job before I joined. I don't think they need me for that, but I am there and I'm super excited to be part of, the Open RAN journey. So yeah, definitely, that's there to stay. And the reason is the exact same reason as you would have, actually heard me say 1 year ago or 2 years ago. So it brings optionality to a supply chain that is really, really screaming for a healthier, wider ecosystem and a wider kind of choice base where the operators have more players to choose from. And that will drive not only like a lower cost, that eventually, of course, it becomes, a rollout that is bigger, faster. But more importantly, it brings more innovation. And that's more important, not only because, of course, that's innovation that the customer get to see, but also because the innovation is by a long margin the factor that drives cost down faster. So I think it's really good for the industry, not just good, I think it's essential.
Yeah.
And we'll make it.
Yeah, absolutely. And but as I said, it's sort of that's the way we're going. The question is how fast we're going. And for different operators, the pace might be different, not because of a strategic choice, but because of what you need out there. So, not every operator. So just to compare the number of sites is not necessarily a measure of their commitment, even if,
Yeah, I mean, the more the better, depends on the size of the country and etc. Now, I would say 30,000 or 130,000 radios is not insignificant as a commitment. But the one thing is true, I think, just to reinforce what you're saying, is that different operators are at different points of their life cycle. So normally,
Yeah.
in particular the RAN, but to some extent also the core, operators enter into multi-year commitments when they sign a contract, which is mutually beneficial for the supplier and for the operator. It creates some certainty, and of course, I mean, investing in network is a very significant investment, and everybody needs to have some kind of assurance and certainty about the framework where the investments are made. So typically, it's not uncommon that operators enter into 5 years agreement, minimum 3 years, but I've seen 5 and I've seen longer than that, which means that if you were to change the architecture, and this is not different than when single RAN appeared a number of years ago, I've forgotten how many years ago, 15, is not different, that you really want to kind of introduce the new architecture because it's better. But there is a point in time for you on your reality that is the optimum point at which you will renegotiate the contract, and then you will refresh in a way that you can write off equipment that's been already, you know, at the end of its life without incurring in any, unnecessary financial complication. So these things are complex, but I think we have to acknowledge as an industry that different operators are at a different point of their kind of contract life cycle. And sometimes the expectation, and particularly maybe from outside of operators, suppliers, or analysts, is that change is going to be almost instantaneous. But that's not the way it necessarily, is best for the operator. And sometimes you just need to choose your own pace. So I think that's what we're saying. I agree with you. Now, on top of that, there are different opinions, and there are people that see the benefit, people that maybe don't see the benefit yet. There are, advocates, and there are still haters or negationism of the technology, but I think that will fade away.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about what you see coming up next. We're at the beginning of the year, so
Hmm.
what do you see?
Ah, apart from Open RAN, which I
Apart from-
think I think we'll see. I think we'll see it accelerating. So I think by the end of the year, maybe we will have concluded that this was whatever the inflection year or whatever. Knowing that we are in this, anyway, steady progress, and I think we'll see some movement. Uh, Apart from that, I think like old ideas and concepts, relatively old, like 5G core, cloud native, that have been known for some time. And there was like the first kind of maybe cycle of hype, and then they were slightly forgotten. They will start to reveal, why they were there and why they were so important. On the 5G core is almost, you know, not automatic, but obviously, you need to move from 5G non-standalone to 5G standalone, and that has some advantages, and that requires 5G core. So it's like, well, it's the direction of travel anyway. On the cloud nativeness, it's a different story, because I think that's something that the industry tried, and not many operators got it right. It was difficult, it was bumpy, also because the landscape changed, and some players, were acquired by other players, and that made it difficult. So I think there's been um, a lot of hesitation as to why cloud native was so important in the first place. And there are some things and efficiencies and stuff, but it's difficult to see how the customer is gonna kind of perceive that or ever see that. And I think it's been underplayed and substituted in many cases by the notion of a vertical stack or stuff like that, which is It's like going back 20 years maybe and building appliances instead of just building your kind of, network core in the cloud. This may be the year where we finally understand why that was important and how having a dynamic core where you can allocate workloads anywhere and the infrastructure you can deploy it quickly because it's homogeneous and it's always the same. And you can schedule your network function quickly anywhere in the country. Suddenly it becomes very important to the point that it will probably tell kind of you know operators in the front from operators behind.
Now, is it the sort of Open RAN is a new architecture, cloud native and new architecture? Are they kind of related in the sense that you don't want to do one and the other, or one or the other? I mean, so is it not surprising from that you see an inflection point for both, in the sense that for a lot of operators is going to be part of a bigger
Spot on.
architecture?
Totally. But I think what the industry has failed to understand is that they are both the same. And probably as an operator, you would be extremely in an extremely better place if you have a really good team doing both. Same team. Because the reality of one and the other is the same, and the synergies between one and the other is going to be important. And one is the scale up version of the other. Now, when you like end up with this kind of massive, you know, distributed infrastructure where you can schedule workloads no matter if they are run or core, any function on the core, and you have like different planes, the control plane and the user plane, and you can allocate them in completely different granularities so that you always stay close to the customer and you can start. Imagine that you like when is it going to be the point at which we start running workloads on GPUs, and why? And what are you going to need at that point in time to be ready?
Yeah, and that's where you're gonna have that naturally. You're gonna have disaggregation, multiple vendors become less of an issue, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
But you need like from the small, almost at the base of the cell tower to a big aggregation point in the center of a network. You need to have the same cloud nativeness, the same set of tools, the same architecture, the same kind of orchestration, the same at service level and network function level. That is a very complex task that most of operators, I think, underplayed. And to your early question, I think 2025 may be the year where that starts to come into play and where the industry understands that it was actually a good idea. Um, so apart from that, and maybe more talked about things related to this, slicing, of course, we'll see more and more of it. But
yeah,
that's very close to the conversation we just had.
yeah.
How you're gonna
Now,
slice the different services and how you're gonna cut them and keep them close to the customer is going to be very interesting.
now, let me ask you a final question. You didn't
Sure.
mention AI, Gen AI, in your predictions. How's that?
Um, I did. Well,
Okay.
because
Mhm.
without saying AI or Gen I think having a cloud native core is the only way to be ready for what's coming. Now, I think we need to differentiate AI for network and network for AI. So what I think we're talking about is what kind of network do you need to have to make sure that you are in the best place to serve your customers' needs when it comes to their AI use cases. Now, we need to accept that no one knows, what they are going to be exactly. but we are beginning to understand certain things that will be part of that reality. So having a cloud native network, etc., is part of having a network that is prepared to serve your customers, to satisfy their AI needs. AI for network is an entirely different thing. Now, you look at Verizon, yeah, we've been using it for years at many different places, like from how we deploy our network investments in an optimal way, how we scale resources in an optimal way, both human resources as well as technical resources, how we forecast the capacity that we're going to need, and many more things. So it's been gradually more and more embedded in how we plan, and it's more and more embedded in how we automate the network. And that's unstoppable, and that's coming. Super interesting, but I think the true challenge is going to be have a network that can satisfy your customers' needs, not just your own. So yeah, that's also going to happen, as well as APIs that we've been talking for a while. They're not like a boring subject. I think there's more to come on that. And I think probably 2025 may also be the year where satellite direct to device becomes, I don't know what the right word is, but it's a trending topic. But I think it's gonna hit the ground and running, and we'll see it. Maybe the first few launches, we'll see.
Well, Yago, thank you so much. Maybe in a year's time we can just revisit and see whether that was happened or not, or what we should see for the next year. Well, so thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you as always.
Same thing. Thank you,
And
Monica.
thank you all for listening or watching our conversation. And hope to see you next time.